Good morning, Mr. Slay. Good morning, everybody.
Morning, DCJ.
Are we ready?
We are ready, DCJ.
Yes.
We will be dealing with Exhibit U13, Chairperson. But before we get to it, we have representatives of some of the parties present, together with some interested groups. Maybe they could place themselves on record.
Yes, let them do that. They could just come to the podium and somebody will sanitize, yeah.
Yes.
Good morning, Chairperson.
Good morning.
Chris McConaughey from Johannesburg Bar, representing Eskom as an interested party.
Thank you very much.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning.
Welcome, Lusenga, from the Pan-African Bar on behalf of Ms. Lynn Brown. For today, we'll be formally on record tomorrow when Mr. Zola Totsi takes a stand.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Morning, Chair.
Good morning.
Lerato Mopedi from the Dwaba Mazwai attorneys. I'm representing Mr. Tshediso Matona, who is a witness.
Okay, thank you.
Morning, Chairperson.
Good morning.
John Levecha from Chimalanga Incorporated. I'm representing Mr. Toto, the former chairperson of Eskom. We are on tomorrow, but we're quite interested today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes.
Chairperson, we are dealing with matters relating to the Eskom work stream, and in particular, the suspension of the 4 executives at Eskom. We have the first witness being one of the executives who were suspended, Mr. Tshediso Matona. And in respect of him, we will be using a bundle marked Exhibit U13, 1-3.
That will be confusing, Mr. Slege.
Yes.
I think it's Eskom Bundle 01. Yes.
Indeed.
And
Indeed.
inside it, it must be having Exhibit U13.
Indeed,
Yeah.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairperson.
All right.
Indeed.
We must just make sure that the witness has got the right bundle as well.
The
Maybe
witness
has got the right bundle.
has exactly the right bundle.
Okay, okay. Now that's fine. Please administer the oath. You might wish to move your mask as you take the oath, Mr. Matona. Yes.
Please keep your mic on for the oath. Please state your full names for the record.
Tshediso Matona.
Do you have any objection to taking the prescribed oath?
No.
Do you consider the oath to be binding on your conscience?
Yes.
Do you swear that the evidence will give it with the truth, the whole truth, and nothing else but the truth? If so, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated. Mr. Slege,
Thank you, Chairperson.
depending on what's going to happen with regard to your second witness, it may be that you might spend more time with this witness to deal with various matters properly.
Okay.
If the second witness will be rescheduled.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm just mentioning that.
No, I appreciate that, Chairperson. I will ask my junior to attend to that
Yes.
while we proceed with the first witness.
Okay.
Chairperson, I should also draw to your attention that this witness has testified in a closed session, and a transcript of his testimony in the closed sessions is contained in the bundle as item 16, 16.
16.
16, Chairperson.
Okay.
But I will get to it in due course.
Yes. I have a suspicion that your voice might be so soft that the transcribers might not hear you clearly, and somebody is nodding. So I think, just try and raise your voice.
I will raise it, Chairperson.
Yeah.
Let me have a sip of water.
Is there water for the witness there? Okay.
There is one. Chairperson, the witness has also provided the Commission with an affidavit, in which event much of what is contained in the affidavit, Chairperson, will be confirmed by the witness. Mr. Matona, if I may proceed, Chairperson.
Yes, you may.
Mr. Matona, thank you. You have the bundle in front of you, Eskom Bundle 01, Exhibit U13.
Yes, I do.
Yes. That bundle has an index to it with 17 items to it. It's a two-page index with 17 items. Can you see that?
I can see that.
Now, you have provided the Commission with an affidavit which is contained on page 2 of that bundle onwards. And when I refer to page 2, I'm referring to the paginated page in the right-hand corner, which is in a red color.
I can see that.
Mr. Slugger, I'm not sure what the arrangement is. You will see that there are two paginated numbers, or numbers of pagination.
Yes, sir.
There are the red numbers and the black numbers. Now, for a long time, we used to have only the red numbers, but that changed a few weeks ago. And since then, whenever there are two numbers, black and red, there's been reliance on the black numbers for pagination. Now, that came about because what the people preparing the bundles had done with regard to the red numbers is that they had paginated sections in a bundle independently of one another, with the result that in one bundle you could get 3 pages 10 or page 10s, pages 10. And I said that the pagination should be sequential so that from the first page up to the last page in the bundle, the numbers follow one another. And then they started doing the black numbers. So I'm just explaining that so that if that is something you understand, but there is a reason that we stick to the red numbers, I know that, that's a special deliberate decision. Yeah.
I understand, Mr. Chairperson. What was prepared for this witness is a bundle that was used in the closed session, and they prepared it without using the black numbering. So for present purposes, Chairperson, we will follow the red numbering because that's the only, his bundle and I only have the red numbering.
Oh,
But yours will have the two numberings.
oh, but the red
Yes.
ones are sequential.
The red ones, I can confirm they are sequential.
Oh, okay, no, that's fine. Because the whole point is simply that we mustn't have two tens, pages 10 and so on and so on.
Correct.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just that I think at the beginning of each bundle, it will be important to place on record whether we are using red numbers or black numbers.
Indeed, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Matona. For present purposes, we will use the red numbering or pagination at the right-hand corner of your file. You follow that?
I do.
Just remember to speak out and not to nod, so that the record can capture your communication to the chairperson.
Certainly, sir.
Thank you. So I was saying the affidavit is contained on page 2 of this bundle up until to page 29, and I'm referring to the red pagination.
Yes.
Mr. Matona, you have indicated, or stated rather, in your affidavit, and we could simply confirm this on record before we get to the other issues. On page 3, that you were appointed at Eskom, I will read it on record. I was appointed on 1 October 2014 as Chief Executive of Eskom Holdings, a state-owned public company, and as an Executive Director of its board. My recruitment was conducted by the Board of Directors of Eskom during, you will have to explain to the chairperson the corrections that you made during the closed sessions. As you can see there, it says 1994. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that. It should have said 2014.
It should read 2014.
2014, that's right.
Through a job advertisement, shortlisting, and interview process, which in turn recommended my appointment to the Minister of Public Enterprises, the latter then secured the approval of the Cabinet for my appointment. So, save for that correction, you confirm what is stated there.
I do.
And you have also stated in your affidavit that is on, if you turn to page 9, and so you would see that I'm not reading the zeros before the number.
I am on page 9, yes.
You follow? You refer to, are you on page 9?
I'm on page 9, that's correct.
There is a heading there, 11 March 2015. Can you see that?
Yes.
You refer to a meeting which takes place on the 11th of March 2015, convened prior to the arrival of the minister. that 11th of March 2015, you go on to relate what happened during that day, and I wish you to turn to page 10.
I'm with you.
Paragraph 18.13. To paragraph 19 on page 12, where you deal with the reasons for your suspension on paragraph 19. You see that?
Yes.
Now, would you tell the chairperson, when were you suspended at Eskom?
So, as the affidavit indicates, I was suspended on the 11th of March, on the evening of the 11th of March. That was at the end of what had been a board meeting that had commenced that morning. But as I indicate in my affidavit, a board meeting from which I was requested to recuse myself, together with the finance director, Ms. Tshediso Matona, we were requested to recuse ourselves from that meeting. And we were only called at the end of the day, towards the evening, and were informed of what had been deliberations of the board, which included a decision to suspend us. Well, at least myself, because I was called alone and informed that I was being suspended.
Yes. Could you tell the chairperson what reasons were you given for your suspension?
Well, the reason for the suspension was the fact that the board had resolved that there should be an inquiry or some kind of an investigation into the affairs of the company, which investigation they held a view required that myself and of course the other executives be absent from the company. So the idea was to ensure that we're not present whilst this inquiry was being undertaken. So that was the reason, and of course, as my affidavit indicates, it's a reason which I was opposed to. I actually didn't think that at that stage the company required the kind of inquiry that had been proffered as the reason why I should set aside. And I might also add, Chairperson, that all along the way, the board had insisted that there was no wrongdoing on my part. I had not done anything wrong. I had not committed any misconduct. They just wanted me to be away whilst this inquiry was underway.
So, to your recollection, was the word suspension used in that communication with you?
The word suspension was not used. The situation was something along the lines that, how can you help us achieve the objective of you not being here? So I was a bit confused about where this was going, and I explicitly asked, so can I come to work tomorrow? Which means the next day. Can I come back to work the next day? And at that point, they said, no, we would like you not to be here. Then I said to them, well, actually, can I just go home and think about this? Can I go and think about how I might assist this process? At that point, I was told, okay, we've heard you. Just give us another moment. Then I left the meeting for about half an hour. I was then called back after half an hour, at which point I was served with a letter of suspension. So I was then informed that, well, listen, we've heard you, but we've resolved now to suspend you. And I was immediately handed that letter right there and then. So I left that meeting having been a suspended chief executive of Eskom.
Yes. If you turn to page...
Just before that, you had been at Eskom for only about 5 months, 11 days when you were suspended, is that right?
That's right. So from the 1st of October to the 11th of March is just a little over 5 months, correct?
Yes. And who was the chairperson of the board of Eskom at the time you served as its chief executive?
The chairperson of the board at the time was Mr. Zolatsotsi.
Yes, throughout your time.
Throughout my time, yes.
Yes. And at the meeting of the 11th, was he chairing that meeting?
He was chairing that meeting.
Yes. The inquiry that you were, that was proposed, had you heard about it or it's the need for there to be such an inquiry prior to the meeting?
Yes. So at about the 8th, which was, I remember it was a Sunday evening, we get a notice of a meeting that is being called at very short notice for the next day. And which meeting, had a proposed resolution. It was a bit peculiar because resolutions of the company are prepared by the company secretary. But in fact, the company secretary was drawing attention to the fact that there is an email requesting a meeting, and when I went to look at that email, there was this proposed resolution for an inquiry into the affairs of the company. The long and short is that then the meeting convened.
So you were saying the norm is that the resolutions of the board used to be prepared by the company secretary.
That's how it should be.
Yeah, but was it like that before this particular
It
one?
was like that before.
Yeah.
That's standard practice.
Invariably, or there had been exceptions as far as you know?
As far as I know, there is no exception here. And the point about it is to ensure that matters that serve, for which the board is going to take a decision, are properly processed through, the administration of the company, for which the company secretary is responsible.
Yes. Did you get to know prior to the meeting of the 11th who had drafted that proposed resolution?
I never got to know who had drafted that.
Yes.
And the issue didn't arise
Yes.
in the meeting that happened.
Yes.
What was discussed was what is the rationale and the whole point about this inquiry.
Yes, yes. And but the notice for a meeting, who did it come from?
So I was notified.
Or?
I was notified by the company secretary. I think it was at the request of the chairperson.
Yes. Yes. And the inquiry, it was said the inquiry was to look into the affairs of Eskom.
That's right.
Is that how broad it was going to be?
It was as broad as that.
Yes, yes. and it was said that you should not be coming to work while that inquiry was going on.
Correct.
Yes, but it was said that there was no suggestion that you had done anything wrong.
Absolutely.
Yes. Okay, please continue, Mr. Slayer.
Thank you, Chairperson. Now,
Maybe before you do that, before you were excused from the meeting of the board, did you get to know who was sponsoring this resolution or pushing for this proposal for an inquiry and also for the suspension? Or is that something you could not tell?
What the chairperson had said in that meeting that was called a short notice on the 9th, he had said that he had been requested by the minister and the president. He indicated that in fact he had spoken to both the minister and the president, and they had suggested that such an inquiry be.
And the president is a reference to the president of the Republic.
President Zuma,
Yeah.
the president of the country at the time.
Yes.
Correct.
So he said he had spoken to the president and the minister about this proposal.
About this, yes, correct. That,
Yes.
that there be an inquiry. Such an
Okay.
inquiry.
Okay. Mr. Slay.
thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Matona, then, you talked about you being handed a letter of suspension. Let's see on page 328.
Which tab are you referring to?
6, item 6.
Item 6. Yes, I can see the letter of suspension. Yes,
Is that the letter of
that's the
suspension?
letter. That's the letter that I was handed.
Now, let me read that into the record so we can see what was stated. It's a letter on Eskom's letterhead, dated 11 March 2015. It's addressed to yourself. It says, Dear Mr. Matona, notice of suspension as Eskom Chief Executive. It reads, I refer to the meeting of today, 11 March 2015, wherein we discussed the company's concerns regarding the serious state of the company and the board resolution to conduct an independent inquiry into the possibility that the power delivery may be compromised by either intentional or negligent conduct. Due to the nature of this inquiry and the importance of it being free of any influence from leadership in the organization, pending the completion of an investigation into these matters, you should be placed on suspension without any loss, benefits, and pay. I confirm that you were advised of the nature and extent of the inquiry and that you were afforded an opportunity to make representations to the board subcommittee why you should not be suspended pending the outcome of the inquiry. May I pause there? Because I see the word suspension it has been mentioned 2 times in the 2 paragraphs that I've read. Did you have the opportunity to read this letter at the time it was handed up to you?
Yes, I did. As you can imagine, this now is coming as a bit of a shock, where I now sit and I see a letter beside me, the chairperson sat beside me, and I see this letter and I see the subject in bold and capital letters. And I just looked quickly through the letter. And in fact, I put it on record that where it says that I had been given an opportunity to make representations, that in fact, I have not been given such an opportunity to make representations. So I took exception to that. But of course, in the end, I accepted the letter, receipt of the letter, as it were. So it was a very imperfect situation, where I had not really had time to apply myself to the issues that are in this letter. But I could see where the board was going. Already by that stage, I could see where the board was going.
I'm sorry, you could see what?
I could see where the board was going. I could see
where was it going?
The board was headed towards suspending me because I eventually, in the conversation with them, where when I asked them should I come to work, they would say no, we're not saying you should come to work. Maybe you make a suggestion and that type of thing. So I said to them, well, actually, if it's someone had used the word recuse yourself. So I said, well, actually, I had recused myself in the morning, and recusal is a temporary withdrawal. And what you're suggesting, because the inquiry was supposed to be going for 3 months, is actually that you're suspending me. Of course, nobody kind of confirmed that no, indeed we're suspending you. Until I came back and I was formally handed the letter that in fact was suspended.
As far as you can recall, were all the members of the board there to that day, or is that something you haven't checked? You can't remember whether it was a full board meeting?
The other members of the board that started with the meeting in the morning had since left. So it was only a few members of the board, the chairperson certainly being present in that meeting where I was handed this letter of suspension, and 2 other board members.
Yes.
I later heard that they are the subcommittee of the board for human resources. It was called the People and Governance subcommittee of the board. There was a committee that I was interacting with.
Was that board meeting of 11 March the second meeting of that board? Because I think that board had been appointed, I may be wrong, it was the end of the previous year, or not really?
You are right, Chairperson. That board was a fairly new board.
Yes.
In fact, this inquiry, the issue of this inquiry was probably the first substantive issue that board had to deal with. They had not taken any decision previously. That, in fact, not actually properly met as a board. That was almost like the first meeting of a new board, as it were. You're right.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairperson. Let's go into that, Mr. Matona. We will come back to this. You are appointed effective 1 October 2014 as the CEO of Eskom. When was this board appointed?
This board was appointed in December 2014.
December 2014.
2014. It was late. I recall it was late in the month of December.
Now, the chairperson has already asked you who was the chairperson of the board. You said it was Mr. Tsotsi. Can you recall the names of the other members of this board?
Ben Ngubani was on that board. Then a lady called Ms. Vanette Klein.
So it's spelled V-E-N-E-T-E.
V-E-N-E-T-E, Klein, K-L-E-I-N, Vanette Klein, as well as Romeo Kumalo, and then another lady who had in fact been carried over from the previous board, Ms. Twaita Mabuda. Those are the names I can remember off the top of my head, and it's largely because I subsequently had interactions with some of those people, but there were probably another five members of the board who were all new that I can't quite remember anymore.
Excuse me. Was Mr. Tsotsi not one of those who had served in the previous board and continued?
Yes.
He was
yes.
one of those?
He was, yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
And he was chairperson
he was a carryover
of the
from
previous board as well? Was he chairperson of the previous board as well?
He had been the chairperson of the previous board and had been retained into the new board, yes.
Okay.
So, I would suppose that by virtue of you being the CEO, you would have formed part of the board as an executive director.
Correct.
Did this board, which is appointed in December 2014, have an induction prior to it, after it being appointed?
As is normal practice and a very good culture in at least the state-owned companies that I'm familiar with, and Eskom included, a new board has to go through an induction, and that board did go through an induction in January, at the beginning of that year, 2015, January.
Do you recall whether you attended the induction?
I did. I would have, because I actually took the board through, the strategy of the company and some of the challenges the company had been grappling with up to the time of their appointment.
So the induction would have taken place in January 2015, you said?
Correct.
Now, when, according to your recollection, was the first board meeting of the board scheduled in 2015?
So the regular meeting of the board would have been on the 26th of February, according to the calendar, because the board is a board calendar, as it were. So that was the meeting scheduled on the 26th. But if I may just go ahead, because that meeting didn't happen.
Well, yes, I was going to ask you whether did the meeting take place?
The meeting didn't happen. On the eve of that meeting, we got a notice from the company secretary that he had been requested by the chairperson of the board to inform us that that meeting would no longer go ahead. And the reason for the cancellation of the meeting had to do with the minister, that it was at the request of the minister. It was at the request of the minister that board meeting not proceed, as it were.
And were you given another date for a board meeting?
We were not given another date, so we, the meeting was postponed, subject to notification of when it would convene. As it turned out, the next opportunity for the board to meet was in that instance of that kind of urgent meeting that was called on the 8th. Just about a week later, as in my calculation, for the meeting that was postponed. So a week later, we get this notice on a Sunday evening calling it an urgent meeting.
So did that meeting, you say your recollection is that it was a week later, did that meeting take place?
Yes, the meeting took place on the 9th, and this is where the...
Is that the 9th of March?
The 9th of March, correct. Yeah.
2015.
2015, correct. 9th of March 2015. Okay. So it was a very brief meeting, I might add, because at that point, when the suggestion of an inquiry and attributed to the minister was raised, the board members, many of them, almost all without exception, said, "Well, actually, we don't understand. we have not been given sufficient information why such an inquiry would be required, and if it's attributed to the minister, we suggest that the minister address herself directly to the board. And then, of course, the minister then attended the meeting that was convened on the 11th, from which I was requested to recuse myself.
Well, so that we understand, what was the purpose of that meeting of the 9th of March? What was on the agenda for that meeting?
That meeting only had one item. That was that proposed resolution to undertake an inquiry. It was the only item on the agenda.
So the meeting of the 9th was intended to deal with the proposal for an inquiry.
Correct, Chairperson.
At that stage, that is the 9th, as far as you knew, was there a contemplation by anybody that certain executives would need to be suspended?
Not at that stage. No.
Not at that stage.
Not at that stage. There was no indication whatsoever that, in fact, that was an idea considered as part of the proposal.
Okay.
In respect of that meeting, Mr. Matona, you say you were notified. You were given notification of that meeting.
Yes. The notification is the one I spoke to earlier that came on the evening of the 8th, Sunday, the evening of the 8th, to convene a meeting on the 9th in the morning, which meeting occurred, but was very brief because, you know, the board members at that stage were taken by surprise. You know, my impression is that they were taken by surprise by this suggestion of an inquiry and requested, you know, the minister to address them directly, which happened 2 days later.
Prior to the meeting, were the board members, including yourself, furnished with a copy of what would be proposed at the meeting?
Can you repeat that question once again?
In the notification about the meeting of the 9th, were you furnished with the proposal that would be made at that meeting or discussed at that meeting?
Yes. As I indicated, there was attached to the email calling for that meeting a document, which is like a draft resolution of the company. Now, the one thing I recall that was strange about it is that normally, you know, board resolutions would bear the letterhead of the company, you know, as Eskom. So this looked like a kind of a rough draft that had been prepared. It didn't bear all the kind of normal headlines, letterheads and the format. The format. There's a standard format of Eskom board resolutions. It didn't have that. So it did appear a bit peculiar to me. But anyway, yeah.
Yes. So then the chairperson asked whether the suspension of the executives, and I want to repeat that, whether it was contained, that aspect was contained in that proposal.
As I've indicated, it wasn't. I certainly did not pick it up, that part of the contemplation of such a resolution would be that executives would be suspended.
Yes. I would like you to turn to page 381.
381?
I'm sorry. Yes, I think he said 385.
81.
81.
81.
Oh, okay. Mr. Slugger. You earlier on referred the witness to his affidavit, which is at the beginning of the bundle, but I don't think you asked me to admit it as an exhibit. Shouldn't we do that? As well as if any other documents that are not attached to affidavits, they would need to be admitted as exhibits at the right time.
Okay.
So I mentioned that because you have referred to his letter of suspension,
Yes.
and you will be referring to other documents. I don't want us to forget the admission of his affidavit. Do you want me to do that now?
Yeah. Shall we do that rather than?
Yes, you need to be ready to tell me what exhibit number it should be marked as, and all the others when we get to them. The affidavit of Mr. Tshediso Matona appearing starting from page 2 of Eskom Bundle 01 will be admitted. Let me just also say that it's an affidavit deposed to on the 17th of August 2020 will be admitted and marked as exhibit.
Should I propose to the chairperson the exhibit number?
Yes.
Or the chairperson?
Yes, you need to tell me. I see there's U13 on the spine of the file. I don't know whether, probably it should be U13, and then whatever else might come later might have to be 14, 15, and so on and so on.
Okay. Let me propose a different one, Chairperson.
Yes.
Because there are files which are already U14 and U15.
Oh, okay. Well, we could have exhibit U13 A, B, C, D.
That
Yeah.
should be in order, Chairperson.
Okay, or you exhibit U13.1. Maybe that's, yeah. So this affidavit will be exhibit
U13.1.
13.1. And then as we go along, obviously it's going to be, it would be much more convenient if the numbering follows the sequence of the documents.
That's correct.
Yes,
That's correct.
that might or might not cause complication in terms of for what you propose.
That's exactly what I'm thinking, Chairperson, so that because the order of the evidence
Yes.
may not be in the sequence of the index.
Yes.
So we could, at the end, mark them chronologically, those exhibits we have referred to, and then have them formally admitted at that stage.
Yeah.
With the correct numbering in a sequential order.
Yes. There are two ways of doing it.
Yes.
One is to take an adjournment and identify those that you are going to need to refer to And that's one. Two, then decide on the sequence. Maybe the sequence might have to be changed, or maybe you might stay with it. But just be certain how the numbering is going to go. Because another way might be clumsy if we mark them as we go along, but you end up with Exhibit U 13.2 being right at the end, and not immediately after U 13.1.
Yeah.
So, what do you say?
The chairperson's proposal is rather a more convenient way of doing it, chairperson.
Yeah.
We could take a short adjournment.
Yes, yes.
I will then mark them accordingly, all of them that I will refer to,
Yes.
so that as and when I go through them,
Yes.
they get admitted into the record.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's fine. I'm sorry, Mr. Matona, there needs to be some housekeeping that needs to be done just so that everything will move swiftly thereafter. Maybe 30 minutes might be enough?
Yes, Chair.
Yes.
Yes, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, we'll take a 30 minutes adjournment. We adjourn.
You know how I...
We may continue. I take it the bundle has been sorted out.
It has, thank you, DCJ, for your indulgence. We could then admit those we have. Let's start with the affidavit of Mr. Matona, DCJ, because we've marked them. We've referred to it already, and we can now accept it into the evidence as Exhibit U13.1.
Yes.
We have marked the rest, but they will be admitted as and when we get.
Yes, yes, no, that's fine.
Mr. Matona, I think we were at the meeting of the 9th of March, and you said there was only one item on the agenda for that meeting.
Yes, there was.
You have already explained that the item was a proposed resolution to initiate an inquiry.
Correct.
Did you attend the meeting?
I did.
Do you recall what transpired in that meeting?
Yes, which I've already dealt with briefly earlier. It was to propose this inquiry on the back of a resolution, a draft resolution, which had been sent along with the communication, the email communication, calling for this urgent meeting. And when that meeting convened, it just so happened that the rest of the board members who were present didn't feel ready, didn't feel informed, and therefore, could not proceed to resolve as had been the intention of convening that meeting. So the meeting was then adjourned on the understanding that if it is attributed to the minister, then the minister would have to, the board members requested the minister to address them herself directly.
Yes. Well, do you know, or did you know at the time, a gentleman called Mr. Nick Linnell?
No, I don't. I don't know anybody by that name. I did discover that there is such a name, but I had never met him before. I don't even know how he looks like.
I'm going to refer you briefly to his affidavit because he says that he was invited to the meeting of the 9th of March, 2015. Would you have any idea that he was at Eskom at the time?
No, to my recollection, he was not present in the meeting of the 9th. Neither was any mention of someone like him having been kind of invited. He didn't feature, to the best of my recollection, in the meeting of the 9th.
I see. His affidavit to the Commission is on page 367.
Mr. Selegat, have you moved away completely from the letter of suspension? You will come back to it?
I'm coming back
okay,
to it.
all right.
Thank you.
Okay, which page must we go to?
367.
367.
That's under item 8. The page starts with an index, which is titled Schedule of Documents. If you turn the page, is the affidavit deposed to by Mr. Nicholas Linnell. You see that?
Yes, I'm on page 367, and I see this schedule of documents.
Yes. And if you turn the page to 368,
Yes,
is the affidavit
correct,
of Mr. Nicholas Linnell.
correct.
Please,
Chairperson?
your voice is going down, Mr. Selega. Your
Is
voice
it down again?
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I beg your pardon. Chair, for the purposes of admitting the affidavit into the record, we have marked it U13.7. Exhibit
Is that the one starting at page 371?
at page,
I'm sorry, 368. I was looking at the black numbers.
368, but it has a cover page on page 367.
Yes, yeah.
It
But
actually
the
starts
actual
there.
affidavit starts on page 368.
Correct, Chair.
Yeah.
So that's exhibit U13.7.
Exhibit U, 13,
0.7.
you said B, I think,
0.7.
0.7.
Yes, Chair.
The affidavit of Mr. Nicholas Linnell, starting at page 368, that is red numbers, will be admitted and marked as exhibit U 13.7.
Thank you. You are there, Mr. Matona.
Yes.
Now, there are certain portions of the affidavit I want to refer you to. So you would see quickly, just for context, in paragraph 5 of that affidavit. Are you there?
Yes.
So Mr. Linnell writes, I was contacted on 6 March 2015 by Ms. Dudu Myeni and asked to travel the same day to Pretoria to attend an urgent meeting with the President. At that time, I was well known to Ms. Myeni, who had been a client of mine from time to time over a number of years on various projects in her representative capacity at Mahlatuze Water Board and South African Airways. At this time, I was engaged in a major project at SAA, similar but on a smaller scale to what would become the subject of this deposition. On arrival at the Presidency sometime after midday, I met with Ms. Myeni. No one else attended that meeting. While the SAA matter might also have been discussed in the context of this deposition, Ms. Myeni informed me that the President was concerned about the state of Eskom and wanted an in-depth investigation into its affairs. She had recommended to the President that I would be suitable for that role. Ms. Myeni proceeded to brief me on the background for an inquiry. Included in this discussion was reference to some documentation that Ms. Myeni had. The President did not join that meeting. As I understood, he was unexpectedly otherwise engaged. To the best of my recollection, it was then agreed that I would need to travel to Durban on Sunday, the 8th March, to meet with the President to complete this briefing and mandate. I left with an understanding that I would be asked to conduct the inquiry into Eskom, and I ought to be prepared for that. Now, I'm going to skip some of those paragraphs and go to paragraph 15, 1-5. So he says there in paragraph 15, I attended the meeting in Durban on Sunday, 8 March 2015. When I arrived at the presidency, Mr. Tsotsi and Ms. Judu Miene were there. In attendance was also Ms. Miene's son and another person introduced as Jabu. At that time, I knew nothing of Jabu's role at large. Now, he talks about what transpired in that meeting, but please go with me to the next page, paragraph 23, page 371. Are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Thank you. Paragraph 23 says, as the matter was urgent, I would travel to Johannesburg the following day and be available to the board as and when required on the Monday, 9 March 2015. That evening, I drafted the proposed board memorandum, proposed resolutions, and forwarded these to Mr. Tsotsi. The email also provided progress guidance notes for Mr. Tsotsi for the board meeting. This note emphasized the need to inform the board of the president's role and the key requirements of the proposed inquiry. And he refers to the attachments we will come to in a short while. Let's see what happens on the 9th. If you turn...
Just bring the mic a little closer to you.
Oh.
Yeah, so that you are loud enough.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. If you turn the page, paragraph 27 on page 372, Mr. Linell carries on, I went to Megawatt Park in anticipation of being called by the board. I took with me...
I'm sorry, Mr. Slicker. I keep on looking at the black numbers because we have been using black numbers for a number of weeks. Okay, 371 red numbers. Is that where you are?
My bundle and the witnesses bundle, Chair, will not have the black numbers.
Yes.
So it's 372, the red number.
Okay, no, I just did. I sometimes use the red ones, but then I think in my own mind I go back to the black ones because for a number of weeks we have been using the black ones.
Oh.
And my bundle has got both.
Both, yes.
Yeah.
I believe so.
Okay.
So we're on 372, red color. Paragraph 27, Mr. Linnell writes, I went to Megawatt Park in anticipation of being called by the board. I took with me the senior labor lawyer consulted, and his associate to deal with labor law matters if requested by the board. We were, however, later told the board was not in agreement and we left. In part, I consider that that might be the end of the matter. Now, Mr. Matona, that's the same date of the board meeting, the 9th of March 2015, which Mr. Linnell refers to in the previous passages of his affidavit. Were you aware that he was there?
No, as I've indicated, I was not aware of this person and his involvement. I see that the resolution, the strange resolution, shall I say, he had authored, he had authored that resolution. I'm seeing that for the first time. Yeah.
Well, let's see, because on page 371, the red number, paragraph 24, he refers to attachments. He refers them by means of page numbers of his attachment. He says pages 15 to 21. For our purposes, that's on page 381. of the red number. Are you on that page?
I am on that page, yes.
381, you will see just below that pagination, there's a number 15. 15.
Yes,
I think that's what he's referring to in
yes.
his affidavit. Now, the document there, it's an email from Mr. Nick Linnell. It's sent on Sunday, 8 March 2015 at 6:37 p.m. It's sent to z@liquefier.biz. Can you see that?
Yes,
Are you familiar with that email address of z@liquefier.biz?
yes, I have encountered this email before. I think it was the chairperson's, shall I call it private email, or his business email.
His what?
His business's email.
His own business.
His own business. It says there, Liquefier Biz. Z@Liquefier Biz. I assumed that it's his business email.
I see. Then you have the subject line, Board Memorandum and Resolutions, 9 March 2015. And attachments also in the same name. And he writes, Dear Chair, please find a copy of the memorandum and proposed resolutions. If you are happy, I would suggest that you require the company secretary to adapt to any form standards used by Eskom. Could you also review the substance of this to ensure that you feel it makes the point adequately? This document would be circulated together with a notice of an urgent meeting for the board to attend at 9 a.m. or 10 a.m. if you believe it will give members more time to attend. It is critical that the company secretary communicates this notice both in email and verbally, confirming that he has delivered the notice to each director. At the meeting, it will be important to record the directors who are not present, whether they received the notice. We need to have at least 7 members present. Once you get the green light, please call each director, providing them with context. 1, the President has engaged both you as Chairman and the Minister regarding the current status of Eskom. It is his view that the effect on the economy is massively understated. He goes on to set out other things there, Mr. Matona, but let me refer you to the attachments to this document, to this email. Please turn the page and go to page 383. Page 383. Are you there, Mr.
I'm there, yes, correct.
There is a document there on which it is written Eskom SOE 9 March 2015 memorandum. It's a 2-page document. Please tell the chairperson whether you recognize this document.
Yes, so this document is the document that I indicated had been attached to the email calling for a meeting on the 9th of Monday, the 9th of March 2015.
Then you have on page 385, because according to the email, 2 attachments were into the email. Are you on page 385?
I'm there.
Another document on which it is written Eskom SOE decision record of the board 9 March 2015 resolution. Would you also please tell the chairperson whether you are familiar with this document?
Yes. So this one, titled memorandum, as well as the second one, titled Decision Record of the Board, are the documents that were attached to the email that I referred to.
Thank you. So if we look at these documents, let's see the contents to determine what was sought to be conveyed in these documents. I will go back to page 383, the document titled Memorandum. The document reads, the company has implemented rolling restricted supply to all areas for a number of months. Notwithstanding the integration of Medupi Unit 1, continued maintenance and unscheduled shutdowns have and will inevitably cause ongoing planned and unplanned outages. The CEO is on public record as having forecast that these will continue for as much as 5 years. Medupi and Kusile are years behind schedule and tens of billions over budget. Lost revenue as a result of lost sales arising from supply not meeting demand runs into billions. Escalating funding shortfalls have increased the interest carrying cost beyond prudential limits. Now, Mr. Matona, as the CEO, and being furnished with a document, this document at the time, were these statements in this document reflective of the factual position at Eskom?
Yeah, so certainly these were matters that Eskom was grappling with, absolutely. So they were not new. They had been there. They had been building up over a period of time, which is, and if I may, please indicate that I did not think that an inquiry was necessary because we knew the problems. The problems that had been well established. What was required was solutions. What were the solutions to these problems? Not to inquire into them. They had been known. They had been there for years prior to my arrival. There's just one small point. I did say that we were forecasting that load shedding would occur for a period of time to come. I couldn't have said 5 years because actually I was optimistic that we would resolve the load shedding problem earlier than 5 years. So I don't know where the 5 years came from. But certainly, based on where I sat, understanding the nature of the problem the company faced at the time, load shedding was going to be part of the life of the company for a while.
I see. Well, the memorandum continues. Eskom has been obliged to seek increasing funding from Treasury. The forward forecast anticipates that funding shortfalls will continue. The company has also been subjected to public embarrassment relating to tender and other expenditure disputes, some of which have become litigious. These compound current negative perceptions of Eskom. The impacts of these failings are numerous, and the consequential risks extend far beyond the company to all South Africans. Economic capacity is being severely restricted across all sectors, and curtailed foreign and domestic investments postponed or cancelled outright. These in turn create a spiral effect with increasing unemployment and pressure on the fiscus. The past response by Eskom has been to offer the public little insight to the causes and little guidance to the future. Public announcements are often uninformative or silent. The perception is that there has been a tendency to deny and defend. As a consequence, neither business nor the man in the street has any notion of what the future holds. Now, may I ask you this, insofar as you say what was needed was solutions and not an inquiry, and Eskom, as you point out, had these issues facing it at the time, did the board inquire from you what solutions you contemplated to introduce or put in place?
Well, not in the context of this matter as it was discussed, but I had, as I indicated in the induction of the board, because I recall we had in December, as the executives had come back from a strategic planning session. Coming out of there, we presented what our plans, the plans were to deal with these matters as it were. For example, before I arrived at Eskom, I had been the Director General at Public Enterprises, and I had been instrumental in negotiating a 23 billion rand bailout. So we were on course. There was a war room also dealing with these matters. So there was no shortage of, if you like, hands at the problem at the time, as it were. So we were aware. I presented this thing at the induction of the board. On the morning of the 11th, there is a standing item on the board agenda, which is report of the CE, where I briefed the board on what I've been doing as a CE, and I'd updated them on various matters dealing with the solutions that are being implemented at the time.
So which meeting are you referring to?
The meeting that ended up with my suspension. So I had made a report there, with an update on developments around various matters in relation to generation capacity and in relation to the finances of the company, as well as report back from the war room, because I participated in the war room that had been established. The board didn't participate, so we participated as executives on behalf of the company in the war room, working with government to find solutions.
Are you referring now to the meeting of the 11th of March?
I'm referring to the meeting of the 11th, where, again, I presented to the board what is it that we as management were doing to address the challenges of the company.
Okay, we will come to that meeting in a moment.
Before that, just tell me more about the war room. What was it? Who took part in it? What was its purpose? What was it doing?
So, in about December, thereabouts, of 2014, the cabinet had resolved to establish what it called a war room, which would be a structure consisting of different departments who are supposed to be role players in the supply of electricity in the country. Treasury, Department of Energy, the shareholder department, public enterprises, and various other departments, to work with Eskom at resolving some of the challenges of Eskom. Because the challenges of Eskom, Chairperson, are of such a nature that they are not confined to the company itself. Some of them manifest themselves in the company, but they are related to decisions, what's supposed to be happening in government, support that is required. So it was a good initiative. I thought at the time, that government is coming forward to work with the company, with Eskom, to resolve those challenges. So it was chaired by the deputy president at the time. With the current president was the chairperson of that structure, and it also included several ministers as well as senior officials in government.
Thank you, Chairperson. Did you take part in the activities of the war room?
Of course. I attended every single meeting of the war room at the time.
Did you, at any stage, have the opportunity to report back to the board on the war room?
Exactly. So specifically the meeting of the 9th, as I indicated, there was an item where I had to update the board, the CE report. The content of that report was also included what had been happening in the war room, where I was updating them, what the thinking is in government at the time.
Was that the first occasion that you reported to the board on the war room or its activities?
I think that was the first time because the war room was established in December. There wasn't really too much activity since after it was appointed. So most of this would have happened in the new year. But my first opportunity to brief the board was in the meeting of the 11th of March. That would be my first opportunity.
And, well, this is a new board. According to your observation, did the board understand the issues that you were reporting to it about?
Well, I couldn't tell, if the board understood what I had, the information I had presented to them. What I recall was that, there were no questions asked. They accepted the information as provided, and I wasn't surprised because they were going through a learning curve, as so to speak. So nobody asked any question or even a question of clarification. The information was just received as provided.
You've mentioned 2 board members remained from the previous board. So I assume they would have had more knowledge about the activities at Eskom than the new members of the board. Did they ask you any questions?
No. To be honest with you, I expected that there would be a discussion because part of the reality at the time was Eskom was in the news. There were frequent bouts of load shedding. So I had really expected that there would be a more substantive discussion of the report I had presented and the matters I had dealt with, but there wasn't.
Well, you say no questions were raised, but were concerns raised with you about the information you presented to the board?
No.
Not at all?
Not at all.
Okay,
And I would presume that the contents of the discussion that was had on that day would have been minuted. So the minutes would show that nobody asked any question.
Is this now the minutes of the 11th?
The minutes of the 11th.
March. Okay, let's go back to that document so we can, for the sake of completeness, conclude on it. the memorandum on page 383, the purpose is to see what is it that was being proposed to the board. The inquiry, on the one hand, the suspensions on the other, or only one item was being proposed. So let's see what is written there further. I think I'm in paragraph, the second from the bottom, until this moment. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Until this moment, the board has been entirely reliant on the executives for information pertaining to these challenges. It is abundantly clear that this in itself is part of the problem. This board has no independent and objective insight into the extent that some of our failings might be caused or exacerbated by the management failure. Given the abnormal risks facing the company and its obligations to the public, this board must know the facts, as unpalatable as they might be. So when you read this, well, now you know at this stage that the document, as you said, originated from somebody else. But at the time, did you know that? That this memorandum came from somebody else?
No.
Outside of the board?
Not at all. No, not at all. There had been no indication as to who was the author of this. I mean, it came through the communication of the chairperson. So I presume that he would have caused the resolution to be drafted in the way that it was.
Would this, what is written in that paragraph I've just read out, have surprised you at the time as coming from this new board?
Of course, absolutely. I mean, you know, here is a new board that is really only just starting to take off. Eskom is a complex organization. The issues are complex. They have only had probably one or two interactions with myself. And so when I saw this memorandum and the issues, it really made me wonder, where was this coming from, and where was this going to? It was quite remarkable.
Had the new board had there been a chance for the new board to be properly and thoroughly briefed by the management about the state of affairs at Eskom at the time?
Yes, Chairperson, I have indicated that at their induction. So they were appointed in
December.
In December, they get inducted in January, and now we are about to get into business with the first meeting supposedly in February, which meeting, as I indicated, didn't happen. All indications up to then was that we were good to go, you know, as a collective charged with the oversight of the company at the time. So this was a bit kind of odd, you know, with where I thought we were going at the time, in terms of the issues that are raised here.
Quite apart from your observation, you can see here that what is being conveyed is a message that seeks to express a board opinion on what's happening at Transnet.
Yes. Yes.
which let me rather put it this way, concerns of the board at Eskom.
Correct.
Now, did the board raise these concerns with you?
No, not at all. Not at all. Actually, the opportunity that the board had to raise these matters with me was the meeting of the 11th, which was supposed to be, if you like, the regular meeting of the board, because as opposed to the meeting of the 9th, which only had the inquiry as the only item on the agenda, the meeting of the 11th had, the normal business of the company, which allowed me to report to the board. But as I indicated, nobody said to me, well, actually, we disagree with the information or contradict me in any way whatsoever. I concluded my report, and then so the subsequent item was the arrival of the minister, where I was then asked to leave the meeting.
Okay. This memorandum continues. The board is also in an unenviable position, as it is known that the executive relationship with the shareholder can at times be more engaging than it is with the board. While this board can have no quibble with close shareholder relationship, this may not be a substitute for proper and sound corporate governance. Do you know what they're talking about there?
I absolutely have no idea.
That the executives have a closer relationship with the shareholder representative?
It is natural in the nature of the business that there would be several interactions that are being had with the shareholder department on various matters. It does not substitute for the formal relationship. The formal relationship is that the minister communicates with the chairperson of the board. The CEO of the company interacts with the director general of the company. Those are the established formal protocols. But sometimes information, is shared freely in other interactions with the company. So that's my experience, but I'm not sure what this was supposed to be suggesting. It seems something has been suggested here, but it's not so explicit.
Did the board raise any concern with you in regard to that?
Not at all. Not at all.
Please turn the page to page 384. Given the severe risk of further outages and little independent understanding of the facts, it is critical that the board act immediately. I think the word there is a typo edit. It is critical that the board act immediately to establish firsthand the causes of these challenges. It is recommended that the board urgently authorize and mandate an independent external inquiry to establish the facts of the current difficulties. This inquiry must be unfettered by management and the board and other policy stakeholders. It must be seen to be credible and objective. It must have a mandate to be penetrating and unhindered. The board must ensure that it creates the space and environment within the company and among stakeholders for the investigators to fulfill this mandate unimpeded and without influence. The resolution before the board provides the authority for such an inquiry. And we will go to the resolution in a short while. Let me complete the reading of this document. In order to facilitate the urgent and independent execution of this resolution, a further resolution provides the delegation of the selection, mandating, and contracting, including terms of reference, and oversight of the inquiry to a board subcommittee. While this subcommittee remains accountable to the full board, the subcommittee should have the board's delegated authority to take all such steps and measures as the subcommittee deems necessary to ensure the fulfillment of the mandate, as the board would itself have. There is therefore an urgent and pressing need for the board to gain first-hand an unabridged review of the facts and their impact. Where this points, Mr. Matona, about conducting an inquiry that must be unfettered by management and the board and other policy stakeholders, that must be credible, objective, must be penetrating and unhindered, raised with you during the suspension you've referred to, suspension meeting you referred to?
No. So remember, this is a resolution or set of documents that would have served at the meeting of the 9th, which is the first meeting that starts to deal with this. These matters were not discussed. The board at the time actually said that we don't really understand where this inquiry is coming from, where it's going. We don't have sufficient information of the motivation behind this. It's almost like it caught them by surprise. So none of these matters were discussed. They may have been discussed in the meeting of the 11th, but recall that I had then been requested to recuse myself from that meeting. So I'm not privy to how these matters were discussed in that meeting, but evidently, they may have been discussed, as it were.
Well, having read the document, I see that the word suspension is not mentioned anywhere in that document.
Exactly.
Now let's look at the resolution, because this is what presumably the board would then have had to resolve. It's on page 385. The document with a heading just before the paragraph numbers, resolution. Do you see that?
Yes.
So paragraph 1 reads that this board resolves that there are exceptional circumstances demanding the necessity for an urgent meeting of the board of directors. Ordinarily, notice of at least 7 days is required. Due to these exceptional circumstances recorded in the memorandum, this board resolves to accept short notice and to receive and consider the notice and resolutions of this meeting. That this board resolves that an external and independent inquiry be set up to investigate and determine the facts relating to the current technical, commercial, and structural status, and any acts and/or omissions that have contributed to the current deficiency of generating and distributing capacity of Eskom. That the board resolves to appoint a board subcommittee comprising Zola Tsotsi, chairperson of the board, Ms. Kwaita Mabude, chairperson of Audit and Risk Committee, and Zitembe Koza, chairperson of People and Governance Committee, mandated with delegated authority of the board to determine the terms of reference of the inquiry, the selection, mandating, and contracting of the independent investigators, and the oversight of the inquiry. The subcommittee shall have the board's delegated authority to take all such steps and measures as the subcommittee deems necessary to ensure the unfettered fulfillment of this mandate, as the board itself would have such power and authority. And further, without limitation, to ensure that the environment within the company does not hinder or create a perception of hindering the inquiry, and to take all such necessary steps to ensure such. That the board authorizes the chairperson, in consultation with the minister and the Minister of Finance, to approve expenditure sufficient and necessary to fund this inquiry. That this inquiry shall be required to present its final report to the board, the minister and the presidency no later than the 30th June 2015. that the subcommittee shall have the authority to deviate from the requirements of Eskom's procurement policies and procedures as is necessary, given the target to complete the investigation within 3 months, bracket urgency, close bracket, and to appoint such persons or entities to conduct the inquiry that are independent of Eskom and free of any influence or suspicion of influence of any party that might have any effect on the inquiry, save that the subcommittee shall, if required, provide reasons to the Ministry of Finance for any such deviations. You see that, Mr. Matona?
Yes.
I don't know whether were you able to identify the proposal to suspend the executives there?
No.
So these documents are presented to the board in the meeting of the 9th of March.
Yes.
And you say that was a short meeting.
It was a short meeting, certainly.
Can you recall how the meeting ended in terms of the way forward, the resolution going forward?
So the resolution was the fact that the chairperson would revert back to the minister with the sentiments of the board, which was that they really don't get it. They really don't understand what is this, and that they expect the minister to address them directly on the matter. So the meeting ended on the understanding that the chairperson would have further conversation with the minister.
And did that happen?
I presume it did, because this was a Monday. The next day, Tuesday, we get another notice that the meeting is reconvening now on the 11th.
Okay,
And that the minister would be present.
so the meeting of the 11th is the one you have been referring to, where you make a presentation of your report to the board.
Correct.
Now, that meeting of the 11th, when you make your presentation, the presentation of your report to the board, was the minister present?
No. So the meeting was in 2 parts. So the first part was a meeting of the board without the minister. So it would be a normal board meeting dealing with the affairs of the company. But of course, we had been informed that the minister was going to come, to take further the issues which arose in the meeting of Monday. And yes, the minister did arrive. So we concluded the first part of the meeting dealing with the business of the company, and then the minister arrived. It was at that point where then I was asked to recuse myself.
Oh, so after the minister arrived, you were asked to recuse yourself?
Yes.
You alone?
Well, so typically a normal board meeting would have myself as the, call it executive director, so I'm an ex officio member of the board, and so is the company's financial officer. By law, we are members of the board. We're directors of the board. So typically, we attend board meetings unless the board wants to meet in committee, at which point we recuse ourselves. But that would be something that is known in advance, that such and such a meeting would have an in-committee session, at which point executives would have to be recused. So when the suggestion was made for management to recuse themselves, I thought that it actually meant the other members of the executive who would normally also attend to assist the board. And so I continued to sit in my place in the meeting until I was expressly informed no by the minister, who said, no, UCE, as well as CFO, both of you should also excuse yourselves from the meeting.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, who asked you to excuse yourself?
It was the minister. Yeah.
So then, you duly obliged?
I duly obliged. I picked up my stuff and I left the meeting.
So you don't know what transpired in that meeting?
I don't know what transpired in that meeting, so we waited. We thought it would be short, but I was waiting in my office for the entire day, really. Only later in the afternoon was I informed that before I go home, the board would like to have an interaction with me.
Yes. So who comes to inform you?
The company secretary came to inform me that the board requests that I not leave as yet because they would like to talk to me.
And what followed next?
So I then got called, at which point I was informed by the chairperson of the board, on behalf of the board, that they had resolved to undertake this inquiry, and that they would want that when the inquiry is underway, that I'm not at work, I'm not at the company, so that the inquiry proceeds without my interference with it. And that's when we had that kind of funny conversation as to what does this mean, because they're not saying I should take leave of absence or that they're suspending me, but somehow I must, I need to be absent from the company. So I then said, well, are you suspending me? And the answer was, no, actually, not quite, because of course I'd informed them right there and then that I disagree with the idea of an inquiry. I don't see the need for an inquiry. There are enough hands at dealing with Eskom's problems. There's also the war room, and we have plans underway as management to deal with some of the issues. So this inquiry I don't support. At which point then I was informed that, well, we've had you, give us a chance. And then upon my return, I was then handed a letter of suspension. That's how, those are the events of that day.
Yes. So you were then given that letter of suspension I wanted to go to earlier. Maybe we can do so now. Which is on page 327. Of bundle U13.
Yeah.
You mean 328, that letter of suspension?
The letter starts on page 328 indeed.
Yeah.
Chairperson, may we then admit this letter, Chairperson, as exhibit U13.5. Mr. Matona had read, I think, the first two paragraphs of the letter, and we saw there that despite you saying the word suspension was not used, the letter explicitly used the word suspension. You see that?
Yes. Correct.
But what do you say was the concept used in regard to you in the discussion?
So it was a combination of recuse yourself, step aside. I'm the one who raised the suspension, but the board denied it. They said, no, actually, that's not what they're doing.
And you say it was the chairperson of the board, Mr. Tsotsi, addressing you
Correct.
at this point in time?
Correct.
Well, let's look at the letter, the last paragraphs of the letters. Paragraph 3 also says, you were advised that the board subcommittee was considering placing you on precautionary suspension because of concerns that might pose a risk to the influence-free requirement of the inquiry. These concerns have been discussed with you. Were they discussed with you?
No, because that was one of the things that made me wonder to say, what kind of an inquiry is this? That my presence, continued presence in the company would make difficult or impede, as it were. Nobody said, well, your presence would prejudice the inquiry in this manner, and therefore that's why we're requiring him to be present. It was a general, it has to be unfettered, it has to be free of influence, as it were, and that was the motivation for the suspension, presumably.
Yeah. Well, the letter carries on with the same concept of suspension in paragraph 5. I confirm that you've made various representations in respect of your possible suspension. We have considered them thoroughly. Is that correct?
No, I deny that I had made representations. If you can imagine, Advocate.
Sorry, they say in respect of your possible suspension.
Yes. So imagine the events of the day. So the first time one really gets to know what might be happening, where the board might be going, is at the end of the day, in the evening actually. That they had been there, we had all been there the whole day. So it's late in the day. I get presented with this. I'm shocked. I'm confused. I don't know what to do, as it were. I'm clear that at least my understanding of due process is that I ought to have been given an opportunity to inform the board why I think I should not be suspended. I had not been offered that opportunity. And so I took this letter and I left.
Yeah. So what do you do thereafter?
When I went home, here I'm suspended. I left my house in the morning going to work in a normal day. I come back home having been suspended.
Yeah, but in relation to your employer, do you engage your employer going forward, or do you simply stay silent?
No, I have no. Actually, I think the letter said I shall have no contact with the company whatsoever, as it were. I mean, that was the understanding that this means that I shall have no contact. In fact, they were going to take their tools of trade, from me. The laptop and cell phone. But what had been indicated was that to the extent that there was going to be this inquiry, that the people conducting the inquiry will contact me. I was never contacted by anybody. I later heard that the inquiry was concluded, that no wrongdoing was found on my part, but nobody in relation to this inquiry had ever contacted me wanting to talk to me about the subject matter.
But did you contact Eskom? Did you make contact with the board?
No, I didn't.
It has been widely reported that you took your matter to the Labour Court.
Correct.
Can you explain to the chairperson how did that come about?
Well, as I was contemplating my circumstances, I mean, I had thought that this was a brazen and irrational act by the board. It had occurred to me, actually, that not only was it myself, but the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer of the company, and two other executives. So the four of us had been suspended, which is rather extraordinary. I'd never encountered anything, and kind of suspended, not for having done anything wrong. That was also the messaging from the company itself. So something had told me that there might be a solution, some intervention, political intervention, to stop this. But in the end, I realized that the only thing that I had was my legal rights, and I chose to exercise my legal rights. I launched a challenge with the Labour Court on an urgent basis to have the suspension set aside.
Yes, and what was the outcome of that?
The Labour Court found that my suspension was unfair and unlawful. The remedy I had required was that it be set aside and that I be reinstated in my job. The judge did not go as far as reinstate me. She referred the matter to CCMA, and so we then, myself and the employer, Eskom, went through conciliation through CCMA.
Now, the judgment, would that be the one if you turn to page 30? Well, page 31, in fact.
31.
Item 2.
I'm sorry, Mr. Selega. I think you have gone past that letter of suspension. You have dealt with it to your satisfaction, isn't it?
I have.
Okay, I think I wanted to ask Mr. Matona something.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Yes. It is at page 328, Mr. Matona.
Yes. Yes, Chairperson.
Yes. Paragraph 5 of that letter reads, I confirm that you made various representations in respect of your possible suspension. We have considered them thoroughly. Was that factually true?
No, I expressly took issue upon receipt of this letter. I took issue with that matter explicitly,
Yes.
Chairperson, to the extent that under the circumstances, I did not have an opportunity to make proper representation.
Yes.
This was all surprises.
Yes.
There's a surprise, one surprise after the other.
Yes.
As it were.
Okay, thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Slinger.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, Mr. Matona, then you talked about taking the matter to the Labour Court, and a judgment followed thereafter. And I asked you to turn to page, it's 30 on the item, but you can go to 31.
Yeah, I'm right there.
You are right there. Thank you. This is on the tram lines identified as an extempore judgment of Judge Richard J. And the applicant there is Tshediso Matona. Is that yourself?
Correct.
The respondent is Eskom.
Please raise your voice again. keeps on going down, Mr. Select.
The Tshediso Matona, the applicant, is that yourself?
Correct, that's myself.
The respondent there is Eskom Holdings. Would this be the judgment that was handed down in your matter?
That's correct.
Chairperson, we will mark that for the purposes of the record as Exhibit 13.3.
U13 or just 13? Exhibit U13.
U13, indeed,
Yes.
Chairperson. U13.3.
The extemporary judgment of the Labour Court appearing at page 31, starting at page 31, is submitted and will be marked as Exhibit U 13.3.
Thank you, Chairperson. So, Mr. Matona, your matter was not found to be urgent, but you say the judgment that say you were treated unfairly. Your matter then went to the CCMA.
Correct.
Let me ask you, before going to the CCMA, what relief did you seek at the Labour Court?
I applied for the Labour Court to find the suspension to have been unfair and unlawful, and that to the extent that the Labour Court had found as such that the suspension be set aside, and therefore, in a sense, I was claiming my job back.
Yeah. And at the CCMA, what relief were you seeking?
Well, the matter had been referred to CCMA by the judge, and so we engaged. Eskom and myself engaged in the CCMA process until a point where the CCMA, the commissioner, allowed Eskom and myself to engage directly, to interact directly outside of the process.
But what relief were you seeking?
Well, I mean, the relief still stood. I was still hoping I could get my job back. I was still hoping I could get my job back, but the interactions that I was having with Eskom seemed to suggest that that was not an option. They were not open to any option of me getting my job back.
Now, who were the people representing Eskom at the CCMA or in the discussions or negotiations?
So it was, I think the chairperson at the time was now Dr. Ben Ngubane.
Yes.
And he was supported by two board members, being Vanette Lane, who I have already referred to, and Mr. Romeo Kumalo. That was the delegation that of Eskom that I had been interacting with.
So it was Dr. Ben Ngubane, Mr. Romeo Kumalo.
Mr. Romeo Kumalo and Miss Vanette Lane.
Miss Vanette Lane.
Vanette Lane, V-E-N-E.
Yes. Those are the ones representing Eskom in the negotiations with you.
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Seleka.
Thank you, Chair. But the question, Mr. Matona, was at the CCMA, who from Eskom was present?
So, as I said, our first appearance at the CCMA, Eskom was represented by Mr. Ben Ngubane, Dr. Ben Ngubane.
Were the lawyers also representing Eskom?
Yes. So Eskom had lawyers on the matter. I think it was Bowman.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. So Dr. Ngubane is there from Eskom?
Dr. Ngubane is there.
The CCMA?
Correct.
Yes. So at a CCMA, what transpires?
So the proceedings didn't go far because Eskom asked for a postponement. They requested the commissioner to say they'd like a postponement, and the reason was because they needed to engage with the shareholder, with the minister, shareholder representative, as to give them a mandate, negotiating mandate, in terms of what they could offer as relief, or at least, what concession they can make in the process, as it were. They needed to consult. That was the reason for requesting a postponement, and so the postponement was granted.
Was the CCMA process at that stage the conciliation process, or had you gone past the conciliation process and were about to begin the arbitration process?
It was still at the conciliation stage.
Conciliation process.
Yeah.
Okay.
So did they come back to you after asking for that postponement in order to meet with the shareholder?
So they didn't come back to me. So we had another date. In fact, as we left, so they got a postponement. We got a date, and when that date approached, I can't remember quite what the sequence was. Whether we actually went for the second time at the CCMA. I think we did because we were then. They then requested to engage directly with myself. So we requested the commissioner to allow a direct conversation between myself and Eskom, and that's exactly what happened thereafter.
Were you legally represented?
Yes, I had lawyers in my case.
So when you say the request was to have an interaction with yourself, are you referring to you and the legal team, and Eskom and its legal team on the other hand?
Correct.
And?
Yeah. So we had a meeting, and the indication that was stated very clearly was that the option of my return to Eskom was off the table.
So who's saying that?
It was the delegation. I can't quite be certain, but I think the interlocutor at the time was Mr. Romeo Khumalo. He was speaking, representing Eskom, to say that let's talk, but the idea of you going back to Eskom is off the table. This is the explicit mandate that they got from the shareholder. So they're speaking on behalf of the board and speaking on behalf of the shareholder that they can do a deal, but it's not going to be going back to my job.
Okay, I just want to hear that clearly. Just try and put it the way it was put to you by whoever from the Eskom board. What you have just said, I think it amounts to saying you going back to your job was out of the question. Just put it the way they put it, as you recall.
Yes. So they said the option of you going back to Eskom is off the table. So we're not talking about an outcome which would include me going back to Eskom. So this was effectively a separation negotiation. I had now actually entered a separation.
And can you recall who exactly in the Eskom delegation articulated that position, or is that something you can't recall?
I seem to recall that the person who was speaking on behalf of Eskom on this specific issue was Mr. Romeo Khumalo.
Mr. Romeo Khumalo. Yes. Continue. Well, maybe I say we are it's 1:04, but it's an important topic, so maybe let's go on and see if we can, for the next 10 or 15 minutes, then we take the lunch break.
Thank you, Chairperson. So what was your response, Mr. Matona, to that which had been articulated to you as your return being off the table?
So I now reach a point where I have to determine, how much of a fight am I still willing to put up on a matter like this, and something had said to me that perhaps this is, you have to just cut your losses, leave this thing, just leave this thing, and so I then accepted a severance from the company with a 12 months pay of what a CE salary was at the time, and I just left Meta. I cut my losses. I did a deal with Eskom. I had realized that it was going to cost me financially to fight this matter legally. Eskom was financing the matter from its own coffers. I was financing the matter from my own pocket. So the odds were against me. So I took a separation. Eskom.
So did that happen on that occasion?
So we had the first meeting, which is where they they communicated that position. I went away. I consulted with my legal people. We evaluated our options, and on the second interaction, I think we were now talking the terms of the separation, and they offered 12 months, which was consistent with the legal provisions. If you're not, I was a permanent employee of the company. If you're a permanent employee, the minimum would be 12 months. You can negotiate more, and I did try unsuccessfully. As opposed to when you have a contract, you have a 5-year contract, and they can pay out your 5-year contract. But in my instance, CEs of Eskom are permanent. At least at the time, they were permanent.
Well, did you say you had 2 meetings to discuss, that is after the first postponement
Yes.
of the conciliation process?
Yes.
Then there were 2 meetings.
There were 2 meetings, yes.
The second meeting is where agreement was reached. Is that right?
The second meeting is where they communicated the position.
Would the first meeting be where they asked for a postponement of the CCMA process? Which one do you regard as the first meeting?
So outside of the CCMA, I think we had 2 meetings.
Okay, all right.
Outside of the CCMA.
After the CCMA process had been postponed.
After the CCMA process had been postponed.
Yes. At the first meeting, they articulated their position.
So at that first meeting, that's when their position, that they almost like what their mandate, what their negotiating mandate is.
They wanted your negotiating position.
No, I'm saying they communicated what their negotiating position was.
Okay.
The negotiating position is that, look, you're not going back.
Yeah.
To Eskom.
Was that after they had, according to them, according to what they told you, was it after they had consulted with the minister? Or was that the position they articulated before they talked about consulting the minister?
Well, the consultation with the minister was the grounds for requesting a postponement.
Yes.
So by the time they come, I presume
to the first meeting.
In the first meeting.
Yeah.
I presume that, actually that's what they said. They said this is a position where, this position is a position of the shareholder as well.
Yes.
Yes, that's how they put it to me.
So this is where they said, going back to your job is off the table.
Correct.
Yes. What else did they articulate in that meeting? Of importance, obviously.
They said, yeah, well, they were sorry that the process, the matter could have been dealt differently, They understood that, it had negatively impacted me in terms of my reputation and so on. And, they apologized for that to the extent that they say that it could have been dealt with differently.
Yes.
As it were, but we were there at that point. It was water under the bridge.
Yes. Did they indicate at that first meeting that they were looking at giving you money for you to go away because getting your job back was out of the question? Did they indicate that already, even if they didn't specify the amount?
You mean at the
first meeting?
Well, yes. Well, the principle. There was a principle that said that, well, we can then look at how to compensate.
Yeah. Is that when you said you wanted to go and reflect on the previous situation?
Exactly.
And that's how the first meeting ended?
Exactly, yes.
And then another meeting was arranged?
Another meeting was arranged, and now that was a meeting where I had made a decision that, look,
you are not going to fight this thing. Yeah. And at that meeting, an agreement was reached in terms of which Eskom was going to pay you a year's salary or remuneration, the equivalent of a year's remuneration, and you would resign.
Correct.
Yes, okay. Now let's go back to the first meeting. When they told you that going back to your job was out of the question, bearing in mind that on the 11th of March, they had said to you, your suspension didn't indicate that you had done anything wrong. Did you confront them to say, why is it not on the table? Because you told me that I've done nothing wrong.
I did.
What did they say?
I did. I could. The point I could establish was that they didn't have any confidence in me. They didn't see me as part of the future of the company, as it were. So it was a bit strange. But in the end, you are dealing with people who you can see that don't quite see you in the position. And I actually didn't know why. Because, as you say, they had indicated and reassured me that it was not because of anything wrong I had done. So in a sense, I kind of concluded that there's no chemistry between myself and this board. So I'm better off probably not working with them.
But you had not had much time to work with this board, had you?
No, I hadn't had much time. In fact, if they came in December, it was really 2 months.
Yes.
As it were.
And after the board had been appointed, the first meeting was that of the 9th that they had, or was there, apart from induction, was there another meeting?
No.
So apart from induction, that was the first meeting.
Correct.
And then on the next meeting, 2 days later,
correct,
they wanted to suspend you.
Correct.
You had hardly worked with them.
I had hardly worked with them, absolutely, Chairperson.
Did you know what factual basis they may have had not to want you to continue in your job at that time? did you know why they would not want you to continue in your job in circumstances where they didn't know you?
Yes.
As a board, maybe some individuals, but as a board that had hardly anything to do with you.
Absolutely. I could not establish exactly what was the reason. It seemed that between the Monday meeting,
Monday night, the 9th.
the 9th, it seemed that between the Monday meeting and the 11th, something happened. The board took a complete somersault, if I may say that.
Yes.
Because on Monday, they can't engage with this, they don't have enough information, they cannot adopt a resolution of this nature. On the 11th, 2 days later, they
are quite clear.
They accept the inquiry, even decide on suspensions. So the only conclusion I could make was that this was something from outside. There had been some intervention.
Yes.
From outside.
About which you knew nothing. About which you knew nothing.
Which I didn't know anything about. Yes. Yeah. It was a bit odd. And
so when they said in the first meeting, that is now the representatives of the board, when they said that going back to your job was out of the question, did that make it clear to you that you were not wanted back?
Absolutely, absolutely. I still maintained a little hope that sense will prevail, that they could see that this was not a sustainable thing, that the damage and the ramifications for the company were so huge. I think there was general outcry around those events, which actually led to even a downgrade of the company. I thought that the impact was of such a nature that it would persuade them otherwise. But of course, that was not to be, in a sense that they still wanted to proceed with wherever they were going to, but without me being there.
And you had only been in the job at Eskom for 5 months, a few days after.
Just a little over 5 months.
Yeah. Since then, have you been able to make sense of what happened? Since then, have you been able to come to some conclusion based on whatever knowledge or your analysis of this situation of what happened to you that has made you to come to a conclusion as to why you were not wanted? Or have you not been able to do that?
To be honest with you, the events that then followed at Eskom, after my ouster from the company, which was where Mr. Molefe was then appointed, as well as other changes that happened, and some of the stuff which was reported, all of the allegations, around various matters, made me suspect that it's probably because I was removed to make way for some of that. Obviously, just on the face of it, I have no facts other than what I've seen being reported about the goings on at Eskom after my departure from there.
But during the negotiations, leaving aside the fact that on the 11th of March, the board had said your suspension didn't mean that it thought you had done anything wrong. Leaving that aside, during the negotiations, did anybody from the Eskom board ever say to you, this is what we have done wrong? This is why you're going back to your job is out of the question?
Not at all.
Nobody said that?
Nobody said that. Chairperson, some of the individuals who were involved are people that I know.
Don't speak too far away from the mic. Yeah.
Sorry, I was saying some of the people who were involved are people that I know, that I've had professional interaction with. Certainly, someone like Dr. Ben Ngubani, the chairperson of Eskom at the time as well, Mr. Tsotsi, are people that I had come to be acquainted to professionally, and it pained me why any of them could not have said, let's find, if there's any reason whatsoever that I shouldn't be there, let's find a different way, of dealing with it. Not the drama, that with which this thing was done, which, as I indicated, they said they were sorry for. They said, well, it couldn't have been done differently, But so up to today, I do not know precisely why.
And they never said to you, you are not performing your job properly. They never said to you, actually, they never said to you they had no confidence in you, or did they say that?
No, they actually never said that.
Yes.
Because if they said so, I would have asked them on what grounds,
yes.
As it were. So none of that.
So you were only 5 months into a 5-year contract, is that right?
5 months, well, I was a permanent...
you are not...
yeah.
Well, you are a permanent employee.
I was a permanent employee.
Yes,
but you're right in counting it a good tenure, at least first tenure of a CE is 5 years.
Yes,
That's what I imagined. I was coming from government as a DG. You work on 5-year terms. So I was hoping that I would at least be at Eskom for 5 years. But I had only been there for 5 months. You're correct.
Yes. Okay. Mr. Selega? I earlier on said it would take 10 minutes, 15 minutes on that point, but
it's an opportunity.
I realize that we may be close to finishing with his evidence, but I may be wrong about that. Do we need to sit and finish so that when we adjourn, we are done? But that would depend on how long you will take, or should we adjourn for lunch and come back? How long do you think we will take?
I should take
You should not be rushed. Yes. We have got to do justice to the issue, but you have a better sense.
Yes. Now, my estimation is I could take about an hour, Chairperson.
Oh, okay. So maybe let's take the lunch break.
The lunch break, yes.
But I don't know if you might want to ask something before we go, or everything can wait until.
It can wait until.
It can wait. Okay. We'll take the lunch break. It's now 23 minutes past 1. We will resume at 25 past 2. We adjourn.
Thank you, Chair.